Usually when we look back at some great historical figure or the founding of a nation, there's this expectation of like pristine marble.
Oh, absolutely. The idealized version of history.
Right. You walk up to this beautiful white statue of an ancient king, and the bronze plaque gives you three sanitized bullet points about their bravery. And, well, that's just the end of the story.
Yeah, we really like our history to be visible, polished, and categorized neatly. The good guys and the bad guys.
Exactly. It's safe.
It is incredibly comforting to think that the foundations of our institutions were laid by flawless people. We prefer to believe that the architects of history always know exactly what they were doing,
Yeah.
and that they never acted out of petty jealousy or blind panic.
But then you step into the world of the ancient Near East, specifically the foundational texts of the biblical monarchy, and suddenly, that pristine marble monument starts bleeding.
It gets messy very quickly.
So messy. The white stone is covered in dirt, the heroes are deeply, deeply compromised, and the political landscape is unimaginably brutal.
It's a massive reality check.
It really is. We are looking at a historical and narrative reality that is essentially a masterclass in power, corruption, and the profound dangers of choosing style over substance. So, welcome to another custom deep dive.
We are very excited for this one.
We are. To you, our listener, the learner, we are so glad you are here with us. Today, we're immersing ourselves in the book of 1 Samuel. And if you think this is just some dry, dusty religious text, you are in for a shock.
Yeah, you really had to throw those assumptions out the window.
Right. Because it reads like a premium cable political thriller. We've got espionage, corrupt religious cartels, fugitive warlords hiding in caves, psychological breakdowns.
It's intense. It's a narrative that constantly challenges how we evaluate leadership.
So to really grasp the weight of this narrative, where do we even begin?
Well, we have to start by grounding ourselves in the physical and temporal reality of the text, because context is everything here.
Okay, set the stage for us.
Right, so the events described in 1 Samuel take place in the 11th and 10th centuries BCE.
Yeah.
And this is a terrifying period in human history.
Because of the Bronze Age collapse.
Exactly. It's the chaotic transition from the late Bronze Age to the Iron Age, the great stabilizing empires of the ancient world, like the Hittites, the Egyptians. They had recently collapsed or retreated.
And that wasn't just a political shift, it was environmental too, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. It was due to a highly complex series of systemic failures. We're talking droughts, massive migrations, famine. And that collapse left a huge power vacuum in the Levant.
Which means everyone is just scrambling for survival.
Precisely. It left these local, fragmented tribal groups fighting an absolute war for survival in the region.
And the way this text comes to us is fascinating in itself because, it's not just a real-time diary being updated daily.
No, not at all.
The events happen around 1000 BCE, but the final form of the book, like the way the narrative is structured, edited, and presented, that was compiled hundreds of years later.
Right. Roughly in the 6th or 5th century BCE.
During the Babylonian exile.
Yes. And scholars refer to this final literary shaping as part of the Deuteronomistic history.
That's a mouthful. Break that down for us. What does that actually mean?
I know, it sounds super academic, but essentially it means that the historians who are compiling these ancient court records and prophetic traditions, they were evaluating Israel's past through the theological lens of the book of Deuteronomy.
Okay, so they had a specific framework they were using.
Exactly. The core premise of Deuteronomy is that covenant loyalty to Yahweh brings blessing and security, right? While adopting the corrupt practices of surrounding nations brings disaster and exile.
Which is exactly what they were experiencing at that moment.
Yes. So imagine the editors. They're sitting in exile in Babylon. Their temple is just a pile of ash. Their monarchy has been completely obliterated.
Wow.
And they are arranging the history of 1 Samuel to answer a burning question. They're asking, how did our nation begin, and what foundational flaws eventually led to our destruction?
I think the best way to conceptualize that timeline for you, the learner, is to imagine reading a biography of George Washington and the founding of the American Republic. But realizing that the biography was being compiled and heavily edited by a historian sitting in the smoldering ruins of Richmond.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Like, during the absolute darkest days of the American Civil War, the author isn't just reciting facts. They are desperately searching the past for the origin of their current catastrophe.
Yeah, they are looking at the founding fathers and basically asking, where did the rot start?
Exactly. Where did we go wrong from day one?
And that perspective entirely frames the core theology of 1 Samuel, The text is just relentless in its message of reversal.
Reversal. Let's bookmark that because it comes up constantly.
It does. It constantly reinforces the idea that human structures of power are fragile, that Yahweh exalts the humble and brings down the proud.
And that true authority is evaluated by the hidden realities of the heart, not by, outward status, wealth, or military might.
Right. But to understand why the Israelites eventually demand a human king, we have to look at the massive existential threat on their borders.
Oh, we have to talk about the Philistines.
We really do. Because if you read 1 Samuel without understanding the geopolitics, the Israelites just look sort of ungrateful.
Yeah, they look like they're just complaining for no reason. But when you look at the reality on the ground, their panic makes perfect sense.
Completely.
I mean, the Israelites are this loose, agrarian, tribal confederation. They're basically farmers and shepherds living up in the hill country.
And down on the coastal plain, you have the Philistines.
Right. And, popular culture has done a massive disservice to our understanding of the Philistines.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we use the word Philistine today to describe an uncultured, barbaric person.
Right, like someone who doesn't appreciate art or something.
Exactly. But modern archaeological excavations reveal the exact opposite. The Philistines were actually a highly sophisticated, hybrid Asian Levantine culture.
So they weren't just a bunch of thugs.
Not at all. They were part of the Sea Peoples migration that disrupted the entire Mediterranean world.
They weren't just a raiding party either. They were an urbanized superpower. I mean, they established a massive coalition known as the Pentapolis.
Yes, a league of 5 major fortified city-states.
Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and Gath.
And we have concrete archaeological evidence of their complexity. Take the excavations at ancient Ekron, which is known today as Tel Nik.
What did they find there?
It was a massive industrial and economic powerhouse. Archaeologists actually found the Ekron inscription there. It's a royal dedication from the 7th century BCE.
Okay, so a bit later than 1 Samuel, but still relevant.
Right. While the inscription dates later than the events we're talking about, it proves that the Philistines had complex statecraft. They had a vast bureaucracy, widespread literacy, and an organized dynastic structure.
So the Israelites up in the hills were essentially facing a highly organized, modern nation state.
Yeah.
Well, they themselves barely had, a centralized mail system.
Exactly. It was a complete mismatch.
And the terror goes way beyond just urban organization. The text gives us this terrifying look at the technological disparity between the two.
Oh, the iron monopoly.
Yes. 1 Samuel 13 mentions that the Philistines held a strict monopoly on iron weaponry. And I want to unpack the mechanics of this because it's brilliant and devastating.
It really is.
So the Bronze Age is ending, right? And the Iron Age is beginning. Iron is harder, it holds an edge better, and it's far more durable.
But smelting iron requires significantly higher furnace temperatures.
Right. It's a totally different, much more complex metallurgical technique than bronze.
And the Philistines had mastered that technology, and more importantly, they completely embargoed it.
That is so smart, militarily speaking.
It's ruthless. The text explicitly states that there was no blacksmith to be found in all the land of Israel. The Philistines essentially outlawed the trade so the Hebrews couldn't forge swords or spears.
Wow, so it's a total economic and military subjugation.
Complete control.
I mean, if an Israelite farmer just wanted to sharpen his plowshare, his axe, or his sickle, he literally had to travel down into Philistine territory and pay what the text describes as an exorbitant price to a Philistine smith. So the Israelites are fighting a sophisticated urban superpower that wields literal iron weaponry, and the Israelites are basically holding sharpened farming implements.
Which is why the preservation of these ancient texts is so vital, because the text itself carries the scars of this history.
What do you mean by scars?
Well, we see this vividly in the Dead Sea Scrolls, specifically the fragments from Qumran Cave 4, like the manuscript designated 4Q Sama.
Oh, I found this textual history absolutely fascinating because, we tend to think of the Bible dropping out of the sky fully formed and static.
Right, like it was printed on a modern press.
Exactly. But the Dead Sea Scrolls show us that ancient scribes were copying, preserving, and sometimes actually struggling with the transmission of these narratives.
Let's look at a concrete example of how this affects the story you're reading. In the standard Hebrew text, the Masoretic text, that most modern Bibles are translated from chapter 10 ends and chapter 11 begins with an Ammonite king named Nahash.
Okay.
And Nahash suddenly lays siege to an Israelite city called Jabesh-Gilead. He just appears out of nowhere, completely unprovoked, and he demands that the Israelites let him gouge out their right eyes.
Which is a horrifying and super weird demand. And it feels incredibly abrupt in the text, like a massive plot hole.
It really does.
Yeah.
But then archaeologists look at this scroll from Cave 4, dating to the 1st century BCE, and they find an entire extra paragraph right before that event.
The Nahash expansion.
Exactly. The scroll explains that Nahash had been brutally oppressing the Israelite tribes across the Jordan River for years, violently expanding his territory.
Ah, so there's a backstory.
Yes. And it says that 7,000 refugees had fled from him and found sanctuary in Jabesh Gilead.
Oh, wow. So suddenly his attack on that specific city makes perfect strategic and political sense.
Right. He is hunting down political dissidents.
It perfectly illustrates how a scribe, centuries later, copying the text by hand, might accidentally, let their eyes skip a line.
It happens all the time in ancient manuscripts.
Probably because two paragraphs ended with similar words, and they just drop crucial geopolitical context. It really shows the text is a living artifact.
It truly is. But what is truly remarkable about 1 Samuel is how it actually chooses to begin its narrative.
Right, because we have all this massive geopolitical tension, the looming threat of Philistine iron, the fragmentation of the tribes.
You would completely expect the book to open in a war room, or, with the birth of a mighty general.
But instead, it opens in a quiet sanctuary with a weeping, powerless woman. The narrative shifts from the macro politics of the ancient Near East to this microscopic, agonizing domestic crisis in the hill country of Ephraim.
It's such a brilliant subversion.
We meet a man named Elkanah and his two wives, Peninnah and Hannah. Peninnah has children, but Hannah does not.
And we must understand the crushing weight of barrenness in an ancient agrarian society, because it's easy for modern readers to miss the stakes here.
It's not just an emotional sorrow, right? Though it certainly is that.
No, it is an economic and social death sentence. In this honor and shame culture, the household is the fundamental unit of survival.
You literally need a workforce.
Exactly. Children, specifically sons, are the workforce that will plow the fields. And they are the only form of social security a widow will have when her husband dies.
Wow.
So to be barren meant you were functionally useless to the economic survival of the clan, and culturally, it was incorrectly assumed to be a sign of divine cursing.
The text notes that Elkanah loves Hannah, but, love doesn't shield her from the brutal social reality of polygyny.
Not at all.
Her rival, Peninnah, leverages her fertility as a weapon. She mercilessly provokes and taunts Hannah year after year during their annual pilgrimage to the central sanctuary at Shiloh. Hannah is just pushed to the absolute brink.
She refuses to eat. She goes to the temple to weep.
And her prayer there is so important.
It sets the stage for everything. The language used in her prayer introduces the central thematic vocabulary of the entire book.
Let's dig into the Hebrew here.
So she prays in profound anguish. And the root Hebrew word the narrative highlights is shalal, which translates to ask or request.
Shal. She asks Yahweh for a son. And she makes this staggeringly high-stakes promise.
The Nazirite vow.
Yes. She declares that if God grants her a son, she will dedicate him back to Yahweh for his entire life. No razor will touch his head, and he will serve in the sanctuary.
And Yahweh hears her. She conceives and bears a son. She names him Samuel. In Hebrew, Shemuel.
So it's connected to that root word.
Exactly. The text explicitly ties his name to this root word, meaning asked of God.
This is such a brilliant narrative framing. Because if you think about it, later on, the entire nation of Israel is going to ask for a king.
Oh, absolutely.
But they are going to ask out of fear and a desire to be like the pagan nations. But here, the whole story begins with a marginalized, broken woman asking out of pure, desperate covenant faith.
The contrast is completely intentional. And when Hannah brings the young Samuel back to Shiloh to fulfill her vow, she offers a poetic prayer.
Hannah's song.
Right. And this song serves as the theological blueprint for the next several centuries of Israelite history. In 1 Samuel 2, she declares that Yahweh is the God of ultimate reversal.
There's that theme again.
Yes. He shatters the bows of the mighty but gives strength to the feeble. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes.
What really blows my mind is how her song ends. She prophesies that Yahweh will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed.
It's incredible.
She is talking about a king, and Israel doesn't even have a monarchy yet. Her song is looking past her immediate situation, past the coming kings, all the way forward to a messianic ideal.
But as is typical in this text, the narrative immediately plunges us from the heights of Hannah's pure faith into the absolute gutter of institutional corruption.
It's a huge whiplash.
It really is. The text sets up a devastating foil to Hannah. We are introduced to the current leadership at the sanctuary of Shiloh. That's Eli the high priest, and his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas.
The contrast is just jarring. Hannah has zero institutional power, yet she is intimately connected to God.
Right.
Hophni and Phinehas run the institution, and the text basically says they were worthless men who did not know the Lord. I mean, they are essentially running a religious mafia cartel.
That's a very accurate way to describe it.
Yeah.
We have to look at the mechanics of the sacrificial system to understand their crimes.
How did it work?
When a worshiper brought a peace offering, portions of the animal were meant to be boiled, and the priest was allotted a specific share to eat. That was their provision.
Fair enough.
But Hophni and Phinehas refused the boiled meat. They sent servants with three-pronged forks to just stab whatever meat they wanted from the pot.
Wow.
Or worse, they demanded the raw meat with the fat still on it, before the fat had been offered to God. And they threatened violence if the worshiper refused.
So they are actively extorting the worshipers. Yes.
And beyond the financial corruption, they are sexually exploiting the women who serve at the entrance to the tent of meeting. It is a complete desecration of the sacred space. And Eli, their father, the high priest, he knows about it.
He does. And Eli's response is really a masterclass in the failure of passive leadership.
What does he do?
He confronts them verbally. He says, "Why do you do such things? It is no good report that I hear." But he takes no action.
He just wags his finger at them.
Exactly. He has the absolute authority as the high priest to remove them from office, to protect the worshipers and the sanctity of the tabernacle. But he doesn't. He honors his sons above Yahweh.
And that failure of leadership, it doesn't just ruin the sanctuary. It leads to a catastrophic national trauma. Because meanwhile, the Philistines muster their forces for a massive campaign.
Right. The threat on the coast is boiling over.
And Israel marches out to meet them at a place called Aphek. The Israelites are absolutely slaughtered, losing 4,000 men on the field. In the aftermath of that defeat, the elders of Israel gather to analyze what went wrong.
Which you would expect.
But instead of engaging in national repentance, instead of asking if their corrupt priesthood might have compromised their covenant standing.
Because they knew about Hophni and Phinehas.
Everyone knew. But they looked for a technological, or rather a magical solution.
Yes. The elders say, "Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies."
And who marches out to the battlefield escorting the ark?
Hophni and Phinehas.
It is an incredible display of spiritual manipulation. The Ark of the Covenant is the physical footstool of Yahweh's throne. It is the most sacred object in Israelite theology.
But they treat it like a talisman. It's like a military general realizing his strategy has failed, his supply lines are broken, and his leadership is corrupt. So he decides to just drag the original parchment of the Constitution out onto the battlefield, assuming the physical artifact will magically deflect bullets.
That's brilliant. Yeah, they completely ignore the covenant laws written on the tablets inside the ark while trying to weaponize the gold box on the outside.
And how does God respond to that?
Yahweh refuses to be manipulated by empty formalism. The Israelites bring the ark into the camp. They let out a massive war cry that actually terrifies the Philistines.
Right, the Philistines think, "A god has come into the camp. We are doomed."
But then, out of sheer desperate survival instinct, the Philistines fight back with unprecedented ferocity.
And the result is a total massacre. 30,000 Israelite foot soldiers are killed. Hophni and Phinehas die on the battlefield, and the absolute unthinkable happens. The Philistines capture the Ark of God.
It's the ultimate disaster. When a runner escapes the battle and brings the news back to Shiloh, Eli is sitting on a seat by the road. He's blind and 98 years old.
Just waiting for news.
Right. And when he hears that the Ark of God has been captured, he falls backward off his seat, breaks his neck, and dies.
The established religious order just collapses in a single afternoon.
But the narrative does something so brilliantly subversive here. The Israelites failed to defend God's holiness, right? So God defends himself.
I love this part.
The Philistines take their ultimate war trophy back to Ashdod, and they place the ark in the temple of their chief deity, Dagon.
And for you listening, this is a classic ancient Near Eastern theological power play. The logic basically dictates that if your army destroys my army, your God is inherently more powerful than my God.
Exactly. By placing the ark at the feet of Dagon's idol, the Philistines are declaring the total submission of Yahweh.
But Yahweh does not submit. The Philistines wake up the next morning, and the massive idol of Dagon has fallen flat on its face before the ark.
And they think it's a structural anomaly, so they just prop Dagon back up.
But the next morning, Dagon is face down again. And this time, his head and both of his hands have been severed lying on the threshold.
Dagon is decapitated and disarmed in his own house.
It's wild. And the judgment moves from the temple out into the city. The presence of the Holy Ark triggers a devastating localized plague.
The text describes tumors breaking out among the people and a massive infestation of mice ravaging the land.
The terror is so absolute that the citizens of Ashdod demand the ark be moved. So the Philistine lords move it to Gath. Boom! Tumors and panic hit Gath.
So they try to move it to Ekron.
And the citizens of Ekron literally stand at the city gates screaming, "They have brought around to us the ark of the God of Israel to kill us and our people."
It's fascinating. The Philistine military hegemony was untouched by the Israelite army, but their society is being dismantled from the inside by the very presence they thought they had conquered.
Eventually, the Philistine diviners instruct their leaders to just put the ark on a new cart pulled by 2 milk cows, load it with golden replicas of their tumors and mice as a guilt offering, and send it away.
It's a darkly humorous, humiliating defeat for the Philistine gods.
But it leaves Israel in a highly unstable transition period. Samuel grows up, he becomes a faithful prophet and judge, he leads a spiritual revival, and there's a temporary peace. But then decades pass.
Samuel grows old.
And history begins to terrifyingly repeat itself.
Yes. Samuel appoints his own sons, Joel and Abijah, as judges in Beersheba. But the text tells us they do not walk in Samuel's ways.
Just like Eli's sons.
Exactly. They are motivated by financial gain, they take bribes, and they pervert justice. The leadership is rotting all over again.
And the geopolitical pressure cooker is whistling. The Philistines are rearming on the coast, and across the Jordan, King Nahash of the Ammonites, the guy who likes gouging out eyes, is threatening the eastern borders.
So the elders of Israel look at the corrupt sons of Samuel, they look at the encroaching armies, and they decide this system is fundamentally broken.
They come to Samuel at Ramah and drop a massive political bombshell. They say, "Appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations."
And we have to analyze the profound theology behind this request. Was the mere concept of a monarchy a sin?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because if you go back to the Torah, to Deuteronomy chapter 17, Moses actually laid out specific constitutional guidelines for a future king.
He anticipated it.
Right. The law says a king must not acquire many horses, many wives, or excessive wealth, and he must write his own copy of the law and read it daily. So the structure of a monarchy wasn't inherently evil.
Precisely. The structure wasn't the sin, the motive was the sin.
The motive.
The elders didn't ask for a king who would perfectly embody the covenant laws of Deuteronomy. They explicitly demanded a king like all the nations.
Oh, I see.
They were looking at the centralized bureaucracy, the standing armies, and the visual might of the Philistines and the Ammonites. And they wanted conformity.
They were exhausted. They were exhausted by the vulnerability of trusting an invisible God who required moral obedience for national security.
Exactly. They wanted a visible, secular-style strongman.
And God makes the underlying reality painfully clear to Samuel. He says, "They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them."
Yet, Samuel acts as the faithful covenant mediator. He doesn't just dismiss them out of hand. He delivers a chilling sociological and economic warning about what a centralized state actually costs.
In 1 Samuel 8.
Right. He outlines the rights of the king.
And it is an ancient, blistering critique of political idealization. You have to remember, these are independent farmers.
Right.
Samuel says, "You want a king? Here's the math. A king needs a standing army, which means he will conscript your sons from the fields to run before his chariots. He needs an administration, so he will take your daughters to be his perfumers, cooks, and bakers.
It affects the whole family.
And a king needs to reward his loyal cronies, so he will confiscate the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive orchards. He will tax your grain and your flocks at 10%, and ultimately, you will become his slaves."
It is a massive structural shift. You see, a tribal confederacy relies on militia forces drawn only during an acute crisis, allowing men to return to their harvests.
Which makes sense for an agrarian society.
But a monarchy requires a permanent military caste, which drains the agricultural labor force and necessitates crushing taxation to sustain it. Samuel is warning them that they are willingly trading their socioeconomic freedom for the mere illusion of safety.
But the people are driven by sheer panic. They refuse to listen. They respond, "No, But there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles.
They want someone else to do the fighting.
Pragmatism completely overwrites theology.
So Yahweh grants their request. He gives them exactly what they asked for. And the narrative introduction of Israel's first king, Saul, is drenched in brilliant, tragic irony.
Let's talk about Saul. He is from the tribe of Benjamin, and the text describes his physical appearance in glowing terms.
Very glowing.
He is a handsome young man. In fact, there was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. And crucially, from his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people.
He is the literal physical embodiment of everything the elders of Israel desire.
Yes.
He's imposing. He looks like a superhero.
Central casting.
Exactly. If you are casting a king based on ancient metrics of warrior prowess, Saul is the undeniable first choice.
But look at what he is actually doing when we meet him. He's not leading a tactical strike against a Philistine garrison.
No, not at all.
He's a wealthy man's son who has been sent to find his father's lost herd of donkeys.
That's so funny.
He aimlessly wanders the hill country of Ephraim for 3 days. He is completely lost. He has no supplies left. He wants to give up and go home because he thinks his father will be worried about him.
Right. He doesn't even know that Samuel the prophet lives in the area. His servant has to suggest they ask the seer for directions.
The irony is sharp and intentional. The man chosen to organize a fractured nation and command armies against the sophisticated Philistine war machine cannot even track a herd of loud, slow-moving animals without divine intervention.
He has the style, but he lacks the substance.
Exactly. When Samuel finally privately anoints Saul in chapter 10, the text uses a very specific Hebrew word to define his new role. And I really want to dig into this because it redefines the whole concept of kingship.
Yes, the Hebrew word used is nagid.
Nagid.
It translates to leader, prince, or designated ruler. And notice that it does not initially use the standard word for king, which is melech.
Why the distinction? Why not just call him a king right out of the gate?
Because nagid inherently implies delegated subordinate authority. The text is establishing a constitutional parameter here. Saul is not an absolute autonomous monarch who creates his own law, like the pharaohs of Egypt or the kings of Babylon.
So he's not at the top of the pyramid.
Correct. He's a prince under Yahweh. He is a viceroy. He is supposed to execute the covenant law and remain entirely accountable to the prophetic word.
For you listening, it's the difference between being the CEO of your own company and being a middle manager who has to report to a board of directors.
Yes, that's exactly it. Saul is a middle manager.
But the tragedy of Saul is that his ego and his insecurity will never allow him to accept that limitation.
Which plunges us into the disintegration of his character. Saul takes the throne, and initially he has a massive unifying victory. He rescues the city of Jabesh-Gilead from that Ammonite warlord, Nahash.
The Spirit of God empowers him.
But almost the moment the real pressure begins, the foundational cracks in his character shatter the kingdom.
The first major rupture happens in chapter 13 at a place called Gilgal. Let's look at the tactical geography and the psychological pressure here.
It's immense.
Jonathan, Saul's courageous son, has initiated a skirmish and defeated a Philistine garrison at Geba.
Which really stirs the hornet's nest.
Yeah, the Philistines realize the Israelites are revolting, so they mobilize an apocalyptic force. Chariots, horsemen, and troops like sand on the seashore, they camp at Michmash, controlling the high ground and the passes.
And the terror among the Israelites is absolute. Men are hiding in caves, in holes in the ground, in tombs, and in cisterns.
The Israelite army is hemorrhaging deserters. Those who remain with Saul at Gilgal are literally trembling.
And Saul is operating under a specific prophetic directive. Samuel told him to go to Gilgal and wait exactly 7 days. Samuel promised to arrive, offer the necessary burnt offerings, and give Saul the strategic command from God.
The 7 days are bleeding away, the sun is setting on the 7th day, and Samuel has not arrived.
And Saul watches his army evaporating by the hour.
The tactical window is closing, and Saul buckles. He can't wait on an invisible God while a visible army is disintegrating in front of him.
So what does he do?
He orders the burnt offering to be brought to him, and Saul, the king, illegally performs the priestly sacrifice himself.
And the moment the smoke rises, Samuel walks into the camp.
Of course he does.
Samuel looks at the altar and asks the defining question, "What have you done?"
And Saul's defense is the ultimate politician's non-apology. He says, well, I saw the people were scattering from me, and you didn't come on time, and the Philistines were mustering, so I forced myself and offered the burnt offering.
Notice the pathology of his excuse. I forced myself. Saul views the sacrifice not as an act of covenant obedience, but as a magical incantation.
Rough procedure.
Right? A necessary procedure to unlock divine favor before a battle. He believed the religious ritual was more critical than obeying the explicit command of the prophet. He succumbed to pure pragmatism.
He tried to manipulate the system, exactly like Hophni and Phinehas did with the ark.
Yes. And Samuel pronounces the first phase of judgment. You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord. Your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart.
But the definitive turning point, the point of absolute no return, happens in chapter 15 during the campaign against the Amalekites.
And we must tread carefully here, as this involves one of the most difficult theological concepts in the Hebrew Bible, the Durum.
God commands Saul, through Samuel, to go and strike Amalek and devote everything to destruction. Man, woman, child, infant, ox, sheep, camel, and donkey.
The Durum, often translated as the ban or devoted to destruction, is a terrifying ancient Near Eastern concept of holy war.
It's hard for modern readers to process.
Very hard.
Yeah.
It is not a military raid for territorial expansion or economic plunder. It is an unrepeatable, highly specific act of divine judgment. Centuries earlier, the Amalekites had ruthlessly ambushed the weakest and most vulnerable Israelites as they fled Egypt. The Durum means the entire city is placed under a divine quarantine. Everything is offered up to Yahweh through destruction. No human is permitted to enrich themselves from the judgment.
So it is the ultimate test of whether Saul views himself as a mercenary warlord or an instrument of divine justice.
Exactly. And Saul fails spectacularly.
He attacks the Amalekites, he wins the battle, but he alters the parameters of the command.
He edits God's orders.
Yeah, he captures King Agag alive, keeping him as a royal trophy to display his own might. And he and his troops spare the absolute best of the sheep, the oxen, the fattened calves, and the lambs. They only destroyed the worthless, emaciated animals.
Yet his calculated, profit-driven disobedience.
And when Samuel arrives at the camp to confront him, Saul behaves with a sickening level of false piety. He strides out to meet the prophet, wipes his hands, and declares, "Blessed be you to the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord."
It's almost a dark comedy.
It really is. Samuel just stands there and delivers this devastating, dry response. What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen that I hear?
Caught red-handed.
Yeah.
And watch how Saul instantly shifts the blame. He points to his troops and says, "They've brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen." But then he adds a sickening religious justification: to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have devoted to destruction.
He uses the pronoun they for the disobedience and we for the obedience, and he attempts to dress up naked greed as an act of worship. Oh, we kept the loot so we could give it to God.
This evokes the theological climax of the book. Samuel delivers a poetic, searing rebuke against formalism, 1 Samuel 15.22. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity and idolatry.
To obey is better than sacrifice. Saul basically substituted self-protective PR management for obedient trust.
That's a perfect summary.
And he finally breaks down in verse 24 and admits the underlying psychological truth. I have sinned because I feared the people and obeyed their voice.
He was a massive man who was absolutely terrified of public opinion. He possessed physical charisma without internal character.
And the most tragic part is that even after Samuel pronounces that God has ripped the kingdom from him, Saul's immediate response isn't true repentance.
No, it's about optics.
He begs Samuel, I have sinned, yet honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel.
His soul is condemned, but all he cares about is the optics. He just wants to maintain the visual illusion of authority in front of his political base.
With Saul spiritually bankrupt and rejected, the narrative completely shifts focus. It goes in search of the true king, bringing the theme of reversal right back to the forefront.
Yes. Samuel is sent to the tiny agrarian village of Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, to anoint the new leader.
Jesse parades his sons before the prophet, starting with the oldest, Eliab. Eliab steps up, and he is tall, strong, and handsome.
He looks exactly like Saul.
And Samuel, the great prophet, falls for the exact same superficial trap. He looks at Eliab and thinks, surely the Lord's anointed is before him.
But Yahweh interrupts Samuel's internal monologue with the defining interpretive lens of the Davidic narrative. 1 Samuel 16.7. Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart.
So 7 sons march past. God rejects every single one of them. Samuel is utterly confused. He turns to Jesse and asks, "Are all your sons here?"
Jesse's response is so telling. He says, "There remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep."
David is so low on the social hierarchy of his own family that his father didn't even bother to invite him to a sacrificial feast hosted by the national prophet.
He is out in the dirt, doing the menial labor.
But they send for him. He smells like sheep. He's just a youth. But the Lord says, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he."
And the Hebrew word used here is bar, meaning to choose or elect. David isn't elevated because of a military resume. He is elevated by the sovereign electing grace of God.
And the spiritual transfer is immediate. The text says the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward, while the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, replaced by a tormenting, harmful spirit.
Saul is now a dead man walking on the throne, while the true king learns how to lead flocks in the wilderness.
Which sets the stage for the most universally recognized story in the text. David and Goliath in the Valley of Elah.
Everyone knows this one.
The armies of Israel and the Philistines are camped on opposite ridges, and the Philistines deploy a terrifying psychological weapon. Their champion, a man named Goliath from Gath, walks down into the valley every day to demand single combat.
Now, this is a known ancient tactic called champion warfare. It's designed to spare the massive loss of life of a full infantry clash. But it only works if both sides have comparable warriors.
And Israel has no one to match Goliath, because Goliath is a physical anomaly.
Now, the textual history you brought up earlier gets incredibly interesting right here. How tall was Goliath, actually?
Oh, this is fascinating.
If you read the standard Masoretic text, Goliath's height is recorded as 6 cubits in a span. A cubit is roughly 18 inches. A span is 9. That makes him 9 feet 9 inches tall.
An absolute mythological giant.
Right. But when scholars look at the older textual witnesses, like the Dead Sea Scroll fragments of Samuel or the Greek Septuagint translation from the 3rd century BCE, they read 4 cubits in a span.
Which translates to about 6 feet 9 inches.
Exactly. It raises a fascinating question of scribal transmission. Did an ancient scribe accidentally change a 4 to a 6? Or did they intentionally inflate the numbers over centuries to make David's victory seem even more miraculous?
Wow.
The older sources heavily favor the shorter height.
I always love pulling back the curtain on how these texts evolve, but honestly, let's think about the physics of this encounter.
Sure.
If you are a 5'4", malnourished, ancient agrarian teenager, a 6'9", heavily muscled killer wearing 125 pounds of overlapping bronze scale armor is a walking tank.
Oh, without a doubt. He is a juggernaut. He carries a spear with a 15-pound iron head. The terror in the Israelite camp is entirely justified by the military reality.
But David arrives at the camp to drop off cheese and bread for his older brothers, and he hears Goliath defying the armies of Israel. David is bewildered by the fear of the soldiers.
He views the conflict through a purely theological lens.
Yes, he says, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?"
And David steps onto the battlefield, not with the heavy bronze armor of Saul, which he tries on and rejects, but with a shepherd's staff and a sling.
And we need to dispel the myth that a sling was a child's toy.
Absolutely. In the ancient world, slingers were highly trained, lethal artillery units. A smooth stone slung by a professional could travel at over 100 miles per hour. It packed the kinetic energy of a modern handgun bullet.
David tells Goliath, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts."
David represents invisible covenant faith. Goliath represents the visible, terrifying, anti-covenant arrogance of empire.
And David sinks a stone into Goliath's forehead, the giant falls, and David cuts off his head with the giant's own sword. It is the ultimate manifestation of Hannah's song. The bows of the mighty are broken.
This incredible victory catapults David from an anonymous shepherd to a national icon. The women in the streets dance and sing. Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s.
And this song triggers the final paranoid descent of Saul. He realizes that David is the rival destined to take his throne. He attempts to pin David to the wall with a spear. He sends him on suicide missions against the Philistines. He sends assassins to his house.
But the most shocking political reaction doesn't come from Saul. It comes from Saul's son, Jonathan, the crown prince.
Jonathan is the heir apparent. According to every rule of Machiavellian political survival, Jonathan should be the one leading the assassination squads to eliminate David and secure his dynasty.
Instead, Jonathan recognizes the divine election of David. In chapter 18, Jonathan initiates a profound covenant with David. He strips off his royal robe, his armor, his sword, and his bow, and he physically hands them to David.
He is voluntarily, symbolically abdicating his right to the throne of Israel.
The text describes Jonathan's love for David, and the specific theological framework here is essential. It operates on the concept of east.
East? Let's unpack that.
East is perhaps the most beautiful and complex word in biblical Hebrew. It encompasses covenant loyalty, steadfast love, fierce grace, and mutual obligation. It is the very character of Yahweh.
And Jonathan models that perfectly.
He does. He places submission to God's will above his own political ambition and physical safety, acting as a protector for the man destined to replace him.
Jonathan's loyalty allows David to escape the palace. But this marks the beginning of the darkest, most agonizing phase of David's life. We move into the wilderness years.
Yes.
David is the anointed king. He has slain the giant. He has the loyalty of the crown prince. Yet he spends his 20s living as a hunted refugee, hiding in caves and scrounging for water.
These fugitive years are a severe crucible. The narrative strips David of all support systems to test whether he will rely on God's timing or seize power through his own cunning.
And the text is unflinchingly honest about David's moral failures during this period. The pressure nearly breaks him. Look at the catastrophe in chapter 21.
At Nob.
Yes, David is fleeing south, starving, unarmed, and utterly desperate. He arrives at the priestly sanctuary city of Nob. He meets Ahimelech the priest, and David flat out lies.
He claims he is on a top-secret Black Ops mission for Saul.
And he cons the priest into giving him the holy bread of the presence and the sword of Goliath, which was stored there.
David's deception keeps him alive for the afternoon, but the collateral damage is apocalyptic. Because an Edomite named Doeg, Saul's chief herdsman, happens to be at the sanctuary that day.
Doeg witnesses the exchange.
Later, when Saul is holding court under a tamarisk tree, paranoid and accusing his own men of treason, Doeg steps forward and informs on Ahimelech.
Saul summons the entire priestly family of Nob and accuses them of conspiring with David. Ahimelech tells the truth. He had no idea David was fleeing. He thought he was helping the king's most loyal captain.
But Saul is consumed by madness. He orders his Israelite guards to slaughter the priests of Yahweh.
And here we see a terrifying moment of moral resistance. The Israelite guards refuse to draw their swords against the priests. They recognize the boundary of holy authority.
But Doeg the Edomite, an outsider with no covenant loyalty, has no such qualms. Saul orders Doeg to do it.
And he does.
Doeg slaughters 85 priests wearing the linen ephod. Then, Saul orders Urim, a holy war band of destruction against his own city. They march on Nob and massacre the men, women, children, and infants.
Saul has become a worse monster than the Philistines. He uses the mechanics of holy war to exterminate the very priests of God just to protect his crown.
And when David hears the news from Abiathar, the lone survivor, David is crushed by guilt. He admits, "I have brought about the death of every person in your father's house."
It is a staggering demonstration of what unaccountable, paranoid political power is capable of. And this trauma deeply shapes David's resolve. It sets up the most profound tests of his character in the wilderness, the moments he chooses not to use violence.
Chapters 24 and 26 detail two separate instances where David has the perfect, unimpeded opportunity to assassinate Saul.
The first is in the jagged limestone caves of En-Gedi. Saul is hunting David with 3,000 elite commandos. Saul needs to relieve himself, so he walks alone into a deep, dark cave.
He has no idea that David and his band of outlaws are hiding in the pitch-black recesses of that exact cave.
David's men urge him to strike. They frame it theologically. This is the day of which the Lord said to you, "Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand."
So David creeps through the darkness, knife in hand.
But instead of slitting Saul's throat, he merely cuts off a corner of Saul's royal robe. And even that minor act of rebellion triggers David's conscience.
He stops his men from attacking, saying, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him."
He repeats this exact same restraint later at the Hill of Hachilah, when he sneaks into Saul's camp at night and stands directly over the sleeping king. His commander begs to pin Saul to the earth with a spear.
David refuses, declaring that Yahweh himself must strike Saul down or he must die naturally in battle.
The psychology of this restraint is stunning to me. David has been anointed, he has been hunted, He has the tactical advantage.
To kill Saul is the most practical, logical action to save his own life and claim his destiny.
But David realizes a profound truth about statecraft. The way you acquire power dictates how you will wield power.
That is so true.
If David assassinates the monarch to take the throne, he establishes a precedent of blood and a rebellion. He becomes just another ancient Near Eastern warlord grasping for a crown. By refusing to kill Saul, David submits the timing of his kingship entirely to the sovereignty of God.
That is the essence of his qualification for the throne. However, his restraint wasn't infallible, as we see in the brilliant interlude of chapter 25 involving Nabal and Abigail.
Oh, I love this story because it shows how close David came to throwing it all away.
It really did.
David's militia has been operating in the wilderness, providing a sort of informal protection bracket for the massive flocks of a very wealthy, arrogant man named Nabal.
During the sheep shearing festival, which is a traditional time of generosity, David sends messengers to politely request some provisions.
Nabal, whose name literally translates to fool, responds with blistering contempt. He insults David's lineage and dismisses him as a runaway slave. Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters.
And David's fragile ego shatters.
The man who just showed superhuman restraint toward King Saul straps on his sword, orders 400 armed men to march, and vows to massacre every single male in Nabal's household before dawn.
David's pride is wounded, and he is about to commit the exact type of bloodthirsty atrocity that Saul committed in Nob.
He is saved from himself by Abigail, Nabal's wife. She's one of the most politically and theologically astute characters in the entire narrative.
She secretly loads a massive caravan of food, intercepts David on the road, and delivers a masterclass in diplomatic de-escalation.
She throws herself at David's feet and speaks to his ultimate destiny. She says, "The Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, and when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause."
Abigail uses incredible discernment. She reminds David that he is fighting the battles of Yahweh, not petty vendettas over personal insults.
She preserves his moral legacy. Nabal dies of a stroke shortly after hearing what happened, and David marries Abigail, recognizing that God sent her to keep him from blood guilt.
But while David is learning the grueling lessons of leadership and restraint in the dust of the wilderness, Saul's world is completely collapsing.
Which brings us to the tragic, terrifying climax of chapter 28, the medium at Endor.
Yes, the Philistines have amassed their forces at Shunem for a final, decisive invasion to break the back of Israel. Samuel the prophet has died.
When Saul sees the sheer scale of the Philistine army, his heart trembles violently. He is desperate for tactical and spiritual guidance. He tries to inquire of Yahweh.
But the silence is absolute. The text says God did not answer him by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets.
The mention of Urim is critical here. The Urim and Thummim were sacred lots kept in the breastpiece of the high priest, used to determine yes or no answers from God.
But remember, Saul slaughtered the priesthood at Nob. The only surviving priest, Abiathar, fled to David, taking the ephod with him. Saul has literally murdered his own access to the divine will.
Driven mad by terror and isolation, Saul commits the ultimate hypocrisy. Earlier in his reign, he had rightly outlawed and expelled all the mediums and necromancers from Israel, following the law of Moses.
But now, he demands his servants find him a woman who is a medium. He disguises himself, risks his life to travel behind enemy lines at night, and arrives at a mud brick house in Endor.
He asks the woman, an Esber or necromancer, to conjure a spirit from the dead. Specifically, he asks her to bring up Samuel.
This chapter is incredibly unsettling, and it sparks a massive debate among readers and scholars. Was it a demon? Was it a charlatan's trick? Was it a hallucination?
What's spooky?
It is. The text itself presents it without qualification as a terrifying, genuine reality. God permits the actual spirit of Samuel to cross the threshold one final time to deliver a verdict.
And we know it's not a trick because the medium herself shrieks in absolute terror when she sees an old man wrapped in a robe ascending from the earth. She wasn't expecting it to actually work in this manner.
Samuel's ghost is furious at being disturbed. He asks Saul why he is bothering him when the Lord has clearly departed from him, become his enemy.
And Samuel delivers the final, crushing prophecy. "The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. Tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me, and the Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines."
Saul's physical and psychological collapse is total. He falls full length on the ground, completely paralyzed by fear and exhaustion, having eaten nothing all day.
It is the pitiful end of the tall, imposing king who relied entirely on outward strength, and the end arrives the very next day on the slopes of Mount Gilboa.
The battle of chapter 31 is a bloodbath. The Philistines rout the Israelites. They hunt down and kill Jonathan and Saul's other sons. Saul is struck and critically wounded by Philistine archers.
Knowing the brutal torture and mutilation that awaits him if he is captured alive by the uncircumcised Philistines, Saul begs his armor-bearer to run him through.
The armor-bearer refuses out of terror. So Saul takes his own sword, falls upon it, and commits suicide on the battlefield.
The Philistines discover his body the next day. They decapitate him, strip off his armor to send as trophies to the temples of their idols, and they physically nail the headless corpses of Saul and his sons to the wall of the city of Bethshan.
It is a grotesque, devastating finale to the reign of Israel's first king. The kingdom fractures in grief and ruin, waiting for the true anointed one to emerge from the wilderness to heal the land.
And that brings us to the ultimate question. We've spent this entire deep dive traversing this massive, violent, complicated narrative arc.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We've gone from the weeping mother in the sanctuary to the ark unleashing plagues, to the paranoia of a king, to the restraint of a shepherd. So what does this all mean? How do we synthesize the theology of 1 Samuel?
We have to zoom out and view 1 Samuel as a structural hinge in redemptive history. It transitions the people of God from the chaotic, localized era of the judges into the organized dynastic era of the Davidic monarchy. It establishes the uncompromising theological baseline that human authority is entirely conditional. God is the sovereign king. Human kings are merely stewards. When they substitute pragmatism for obedience, they forfeit their mandate.
And it builds heavily on typology. The text is pointing forward. David is a real historical figure, but he functions as a type. He casts a shadow forward toward a greater reality. He points to the ultimate Messiah.
But crucially, the text never idolizes David. We've seen his cunning, his lies at Nob, his murderous rage toward Nabal. And if you read into 2 Samuel, you know his moral failures regarding Bathsheba and Uriah will nearly destroy the kingdom again.
Right.
David's successes demonstrate the beauty of a leader who depends on God, but his severe moral flaws heighten the desperate need for the ultimate perfect king. The true anointed one anticipated all the way back in Hannah's song.
It's a profound warning against triumphalism. We constantly trust in our modern equivalents of iron swords, tall politicians, and fortified city-states. We still judge our leaders by the outward appearance of their rhetoric or their wealth. 1 Samuel tears that down and proves definitively that the kingdom of God operates on an entirely different metric.
The heart matters infinitely more than the hype. To obey is better than sacrifice.
I want to leave you, the learner, with one final provocative thought to mull over, something that builds off the psychology we've uncovered today.
Okay.
We've praised David's incredible nobility and restraint in the caves when he refused to kill Saul, and rightly so, but consider the long-term cost. David spent his 20s, his most formative, impressionable years as a young leader, being relentlessly hunted by a paranoid, abusive, toxic mentor.
Yeah, he slept with one eye open. He learned to survive through deception, hiding in the dirt, constantly fearing betrayal.
The trauma of those fugitive years would be incalculable.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So when David finally does take the throne and consolidate his power, how much of Saul's political paranoia secretly rubbed off on him?
Oh, that's a heavy thought.
Did surviving a toxic leader teach David how to be a more compassionate king? Or did the trauma of those brutal years plant the seeds of his own future moral failures? Did fighting monsters in the wilderness teach him how to become one when his own power was eventually threatened?
A sobering and fascinating thread to pull.
It's a haunting question as you evaluate the leaders in your own life and the long shadow that institutional trauma casts on all of us. Thank you so much for joining us for this custom deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
The next time you find yourself standing before a pristine marble monument of a great leader, or the next time you are tempted to evaluate a situation based purely on the polish and the outward appearance, remember the dirt, the iron, the bleeding monuments, and the true, messy history of 1 Samuel. Look past the surface and look at the heart. Until next time.